Well, good evening and welcome to another episode of Rich Politics with me, your host, Richard Taylor. I'm so glad you've taken the time to tune in. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, follow us on all the social media channels. And tonight, I am so thrilled and delighted to have a young woman on who I've been following on social media for some time, simply because she's not afraid to speak her mind. And she's obviously been attacked and abused online for many of her opinions, which is quite sad, given recent news of footballers and many other people that have been abused online and the government's latest legislation they're bringing in to fine the big tech companies as a result of any abuse that's not dealt with. She joins me now. Sophie Corcoran, welcome to Rich Politics.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, you're the first female footballer that I've had on here, so that's the first for me.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about you. Let's talk about that first before we get into the politics side. Tell us a little bit about your footballing, because I know you're a keen footballer. And how did you get into it, and why are you passionate about it? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I started playing football when I was younger. I have two older brothers anyway, so it's naturally going to happen. But I had something growing up called epilepsy, which meant that I couldn't do the gymnastic stuff in primary school because you had to climb the bars. If anyone goes to a British primary school, you'd know the ropes. So I wasn't allowed to do that. So I was given a choice: you either sit out or you play football with the boys. So I went and played football with the boys, and I absolutely loved it. And I've grown up playing with those boys over the park every day since I was little, and obviously it standed me in good stead to be able to play for the teams that I played for. So
yeah, and the dream is to become professional one day, I should imagine, is it?
Oh, no way. Not for me.
Not for you. Well, look, Sophie, we've got you on to talk about, because you're a young person, if you don't mind me saying so, and well, you are to me anyway, but you're a young person and you've been quite active on Twitter and social media, and I've noticed that you've come under quite a lot of abuse, haven't you, from a lot of the lefties, as we would call them on here. And it's not that you're unbalanced or you're extreme far right. You're not. You're a balanced young woman who has political views. I mean, what has Twitter and the whole world of social media been like for you when you've talked about political issues?
Well, obviously it's quite a bit of a, as Dan Wootton put it the other day, a cesspit. I think for me, having more followers than the average bean has sort of given people a pass, that they're able to sort of abuse me and say things that they, first of all, would never say to my face, and I know for a fact that they wouldn't. But it's given them a pass. And let me be clear on this: it's not only the left, and I'll be abundantly clear on that. I think I get a lot of abuse from young people on the right as well, purely because I sort of came on and I do have a little bit of a platform, and I think that's given people a right to sort of give me abuse and feel like, they're not going to get anything from it. But I think a lot of people forget that we are human beings. I'm literally talking to you now. So they don't understand that there's a face behind the Twitter account, especially if you do have a larger platform.
Yeah, given some of the news this last week gone, we've seen that the government have now legislated for some of the online abuse and racism in particular. Obviously, I don't want to focus on racism tonight. Given that the government now have seen this as a serious issue and they're looking at fining some of the big corporate tech companies 10% of their global revenues, actually, whether it's TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, whatever it might be, do you think this will stop some of that abuse, the online abuse, certainly, that you, I know, have been on the end of?
No, and I think one of the biggest things I've sort of sat back and thought about is, why are we giving the government this responsibility when in actual fact we're all human beings, and we can't continue to pass the buck for the government and say the government are responsible for all of these disgusting people that are saying stuff online, because let's be honest, they're not. The people who have the responsibility for saying the stuff that is disgusting online are the people that say it.
Yeah. But wouldn't you say the problem we have is, how do we find out these are people like us? I don't know if you've come across this. I've been trolled by same person for over a year. He always does it. You block them, but obviously they still comment on other people's posts when you put stuff on. When they have they got 12 followers, for example, and they've got an anonymous account. Now, I don't pay any attention to them, but if they are making abusive remarks, I mean, one even contacted a while ago, some of my viewers will know this, contacted my employers to say that I was a far-right extremist, and my employer obviously knows me very well. How do we tackle those people who remain anonymous, though? Because yes, it is their responsibility. It's not the government's, like you just pointed out. But how do we deal with those people?
In the same way we dealt with Donald Trump. If they can do it for the President of the United States, they can do it for some weird anonymous account with 12 followers. That's as simple as that. Why were the government so quick in getting rid of the President of the United States, for example, whether you believe it was rightly or wrongly, they acted quickly to do it. Why are they now finding it so difficult to not do anything about blatantly racist abuse that they must see on their platform? Why is it so hard? And I think it's not as if this stuff isn't being reported, because it is. I've seen loads of reports that have come back and said, this X, Y, and Z has been reported for this abuse, that abuse, and Twitter's come back and said, it's not worthy. So
yeah, I've experienced the same. I've reported it in the past. I've reported stuff, and it just comes back. They say something like, "It has not violated our policies." That's the kind of email you get back, and you sort of think, "Well, I've read through the violation of your policies, and it quite clearly does." Whether it's a tick box exercise that someone in Silicon Valley sits there in America deciding which is violation or not, is just. And I think that is why some people are pushing for government legislation. I know that the Labour Party, and I'm no fan of the Labour Party, my followers know that, but I just wonder, is there any place for legislation? I'm like you. I'm a libertarian. I don't agree with government interference into our daily lives. I think I just don't like it. The lockdowns we've had, which we'll come to a bit later and all that. But when it comes to social media, surely these people must be held to account. And if the only way to do it is to legislate through, parliamentary democracy, is that the only way we're going to get rid of some of these idiots online?
I still don't think you will, because if someone could link an ID to their account, but they could still use a name that's not theirs. I think the real responsibility doesn't stand with the government; it stands with the social media companies, and it stands with the individual themselves. And I think, although the idea of using ID to use social media is one that could potentially come up, how many people are realistically going to support that? Because does it impact somebody's ability to partake in the social landscape if they don't have it? I think it's the same argument, and I think it's quite ironic that those on the left are sort of really feeding into this idea when none of them agree with ID to vote. It's the same sort of principles as with using ID. Are you excluding people from society when you do that? A, is it going to actually help? Is there any point of it? And C, does the responsibility actually really lie with our government, or more with our social media companies, and more importantly, ourselves? Yeah, I think this idea of personal responsibility has just been completely forgotten. Yeah, absolutely. Everything, and it's like sometimes it's not the government's problem; it's your problem. Yeah, I agree. I was of the disposition that I think all accounts should be connected to some form of government ID, but it was brought to my attention a few weeks ago, actually. Someone messaged me and said, "Richard, whilst I appreciate your point, some of the things I say are not abusive, but if they were reported to my employer, for example, because I said something that offended somebody but wasn't illegal, then obviously, that anonymity, that being anonymous is taken away, and I could potentially lose my job. So it doesn't give them the freedom to say what they feel or what they want to, because the right to offend is all of our rights. Offense is not, it's not against the law to offend people, in that sense. And I think the difficulty is with the ID. I'm in between at the moment. I was advocating for ID because I think people need to be brought to book and brought to account. But then again, in the example I gave you, when my employer was contacted because they knew my name, they knew my face, they just Googled me, found out who I was employed by, went on my Facebook, and then reported me to my employer. But if I was anonymous, they couldn't have done that. So there is an argument for that, isn't there, so? And I think there's a lot of the cases as well, as there's going to be a lot of teachers that have social medias that obviously don't want to be found by their students. There's going to be a lot of civil servants, healthcare workers, people that are in positions of, jobs where they need to be politically neutral or whatever, are now not going to have any avenue to speak upon, because, again, for example, if I was a teacher, I don't want my students finding out my social media, and if it's got my ID, my name, my whatever linked to it, that's going to be much, much easier. A lot of teachers tend to sort of change their names. I know a lot of people have done that. And by eradicating that, you eradicate those avenues for those sorts of people that are in those sorts of professions to be able to speak their minds and or have social media and not be found out by, again, like in a teacher's perspective, your students, for example. Yeah, speaking of education, now tell me, how the lockdowns affected your education? Because you're a young person, obviously studying. I mean, it's affected a lot of young people, as you know. Has it affected you personally? Oh, yeah. So I'm in sixth form right now, and my exams have been cancelled not once, but twice, unfortunately. Twice? So Yeah, so I was in year 13 last year, and my exams obviously got cancelled. We had the algorithm, everything, you know, hit the fan basically. So I decided to redo the year because I wasn't happy with the exams I got. My teacher assessed grades weren't what I wanted to, and the government U-turned on results day, which meant that people like me had no chances of appealing because they got rid of the appeals process where you could appeal the grades that your teachers gave you. And then they just decided to, you know, flip the algorithm, say your teachers' grades are what they are, and that's it, job done. So those of us that didn't get our teachers' grades, because a lot of schools were trying to, and I quote, play it safe, you know, ended up in a real position where we had nowhere to go. There was nowhere to appeal, so we had no choice but to redo the year again. So I redid the year again in hopes that I could actually sit my exams and get the grades that I wanted, only for them to be cancelled for a second time.
Oh, well, I'm firstly so sorry to hear that. And I like millions and tens of thousands of others as well. Lots of people who should have been having university experiences, you know, living in digs, as it were. That experience is part of the learning, isn't it? You know, lots of still paying their fees, but not being able to attend and doing kind of their classes by Zoom. I mean, I homeschooled my kids. I got 5 children here. My eldest is 21, and I had to homeschool them by computer. It's not the same, is it really?
No. My school did a phenomenal job. Let me put that out there. Every single one of my teachers gave it their all. They're absolutely amazing people. But the bottom line is, homeschool is never ever going to be a replacement for the classroom for more reasons than one, because the classroom isn't just a place of learning, and people need to understand that. A classroom is a place where young people can get away from their home environments, whatever that may be. It is a place where they can socialize with other people, learn teamwork, ask questions. You couldn't do that via Zoom. For a lot of schools, they, like mine, use type chat only. So there was a real massive, irrespective of the fact that we had online lessons, there was a still massive, you know, disconnect between the communication between the teachers and the students. And this idea that students were absolutely terrified to go back to school and teachers are absolutely terrified that was being peddled by the unions was frankly false. We were desperate to go back. I went back a week earlier because I had some things going on at home, which meant that I couldn't be at school, couldn't be at home, so I had to go into school. And every single teacher was literally so glad to just be there and see people come back. Like the week before we reopened, I don't think there was a single teacher didn't say to me, "I'm so glad to have everyone back in this classroom next week." They were utterly desperate, and the unions are out here telling us that all teachers are like absolutely terrified. That was complete utter false because we were desperate to be back.
Yeah, well, I can say, speaking as a parent, I was desperate to get my kids back to school as well. I can tell you, and it made me appreciate the teachers a lot more. I mean, Sophie, as a young person who is politically engaged on social media as well, you know, you've been active with the Conservatives locally there as well. I just wonder, what do you make of the governments? Because I ask every guest this, you know, it's never an easy answer. There's no right answer here, by the way. What do you make of the government's overall handling to date of the pandemic, you know, given the situations that we're in, you know, lifting restrictions now and stuff like that? And it's very difficult, isn't it, for the government to navigate with? I mean, I was on a freedom march on the 26th of June down in London with a couple of friends, and we were demonstrating over some of our civil liberties being taken away. Whilst I understand it's a public health emergency, as long as we have the COVID emergency in place, which gives them powers to legislate for things that they don't even have to run through Parliament, they don't even have to be scrutinised over, they can go, shut this down, it can happen straight away. I mean, what do you make of that? And this is not to have a go at the government. You know, some people, you know, my views are probably very conservative, but the Conservative government of today doesn't represent certainly the Conservative government I would know from before. What's your thoughts on that?
I don't think they've made many right calls. I think a lot of their messages have been contradictory. And I think we've got to be honest with ourselves. I think the only reason these restrictions are actually going to be lifted now is because some intelligent person leaked a photo of Matt Hancock. And whoever that did deserves an absolute credit, because they are the reasons that we're getting our freedom back. And I think there's no way now that the government can justify keeping these restrictions as much as they would like to, because of what happened with Matt Hancock, because of seeing Chris Whitty and all of those sitting there smiling at Wimbledon, because seeing all these celebrities at Wembley. I think now the time has come where people have realised, you know what, these rules aren't for all of us, and the rules have never been for all of us. And I think part of me is, you know, have the government made the right decisions? Necessarily, I don't think so. on the COVID pandemic. A lot of people always say to me, well, you don't agree with the government's stance on COVID. Why the hell do you still support this party? And I say, I'll still vote for this party because in 10 years' time, COVID's not going to be here anymore. There is more to politics than just this pandemic. And naturally, I will still support the party and its policies. But their handling of this pandemic has been real hit and miss. And for an education standpoint, when my exams got cancelled the first time and I got screwed over on results day, I was angry at the situation I was in, but I never had any anger towards the government because I understood that this doesn't happen. Like, exams have really never been cancelled before. So there was no real way of them knowing what to do. And they had no time to prepare for it because we got told that these exams were going to be cancelled literally, I think it was the end of March, if I remember. I don't know, it's been quite a long time, but us remembering. So from March to maybe August, in reality before August, because the results had to be sorted out before, there was no time for them to really understand what to do. This time, it's different. And if they screw it up, I won't have any sympathy towards them because they've had time and they've had the experience to know what they need to do now. They made this decision back in January, so if they get it wrong, which to be honest, I think they are going to, then there's no real way back. And I'm surprised that he's still in.
I think the wider impact as well as the educational side, the economy and people's mental health has been a big part of it. Like I said, my eldest is 21. I got a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old, 4 boys and 1 girl. The youngest one's a girl, so she's going to be really spoiled when she's older. I know that they've experienced, without going too personal here, they've experienced a lot of mental health issues. My son, he didn't go back to college. He couldn't do the remote thing. He said, Dad, I'm just taking a year off. And I backed my children all the way, and it's been very difficult for them. I think as adults we can adapt, we can shout on social media and complain, and we can get things off our chest. But as young people, sometimes it's very difficult for them, like yourself, and like you said, where you have a platform to express some of those opinions. I mean, do you think it's done a lot of damage to young people's mental health throughout the pandemic and the lockdowns in particular?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is the saddest thing, is that this remote learning is going to destroy the relationship that a lot of kids are going to have with their education now. And I think because a lot of people are so, they may feel like they're behind, or they just, we've expected kids to stare through a screen for hours and hours a day. We spent years and years and years and years trying to get kids off of their screens, this, that and the other. And now we've expected them to sit here for hours and hours a day, learning, having no communication with their teachers, no guidance on their work, no feedback on their work. So we've now destroyed the relationship that a lot of kids are going to have with their education, which, if I'm going to be honest, isn't going to be easy to rebuild. And it doesn't matter how much time, we do all these catch-up funds and this, that and the other. The bottom line is these kids have missed hundreds of hours of learning that they cannot get back. And there is no way of getting that back. It's literally physically impossible. And the thing is, it's all good saying that you're going to help those that are struggling, that are catching up. But what about those that are not struggling, that could have done better? That's the problem that we're missing. And that's what really winds me up with this whole scenario, is that we're thinking, oh, well, if kids aren't, really behind their age group, it's not a problem. Well, it is a problem, because those kids that are not behind their age group could have been much better. Those kids that are still getting their C's could have got A stars. And that's a big issue that's not being addressed, and one that I don't think will ever be addressed. Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of young people are facing. They've now, their relationship with their education is completely destroyed. A lot of kids are absolutely dreading going to school because they've had to sit behind their screen and have no real communication with anybody for so long. And there's no way of really rebuilding that. It doesn't matter how hard we try. And I think
it doesn't matter how much the government say let's build back better on that issue. I'm in agreement. You can't get back those years that are wasted. I mean, I grew up in the 70s, born in 75, in the 80s, and we never had computer screens, or you had to go to a red telephone box and used to ring a number like this. So I remember the old days before mobile phones. I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that respect, but it's very different for young people. The challenges are different. I want to finish the interview and get your thoughts on something that's becoming a bit of a culture war, really, that we're seeing happening. And it was something I predicted over a month or so ago, not just myself, but many others as well. And that's this whole idea of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. So just for the record here, for my viewers, they know I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I'm pro-choice. So I'll give an example, as I've done before. My 2 eldest sons have chose to have the vaccine. That's their choice. I haven't, as a healthy man who goes to the gym every morning and everything else and lives a good life. And I believe I had COVID last year as well. I don't believe I need it. So I'd be called irresponsible. I'd be classed as an anti-vaxxer. I'm not. If I was elderly and I had underlying health conditions, I would receive the vaccine. At this current stage, it's still in clinical, trial mode. And for me, it's just not for me. I don't want to know, particularly what you decided personally, Sophie, unless you want to say, but can you see this two-tiered society developing where, those who have been vaxxed can do A, B, and C and D, and those who are, have had the vaccine or haven't can do A, B, and C? Can you see this something as going to be a problem in the future?
I would like to say that I would hope it isn't a problem, but I cannot say that it's not going to be. I think the idea of, creating this two-tier society between the vaccinated and unvaccinated is absolutely ridiculous. I think if we're prepared to treat other citizens as second-class citizens because they chose or not chose to have a vaccine, then we've got some real fundamental problems of where we stand as a society and a democracy. The reality is, and I think people need to understand in this discourse, that this vaccine is not like any other vaccines that we've had. There is, a different background to it in, the circumstances and the speed that it was created at. There is going to be people that are unsure. And the reality is, if we're prepared to accept as a country that we are going to treat people as second-class citizens because what they choose to do with their body, then in reality as a country, do we even deserve to have freedom? No. And those people that are willing to accept the fact that we should, treat people as lesser because they don't want to get a vaccine. If you think that people should have their lives, their futures, their jobs, and their ability to live as a free citizen because of whether they are vaccinated or not, then go live in a country such as North Korea, where that's going to be the reality, because that is not a reality that belongs in a country like this. And it's not a reality that will ever belong in a country like this, because we are a democracy. We are a free country. And if you don't want to live in a free country, North Korea is awaiting you.
Well, Sophie, our time is up. Listen, I've loved talking to you, and I've got to get you back on again. And listen, by the way, that last part, I agree with everything you just said. I just wanted to clap my hands and shout, by the way. But it's been wonderful having you on. Everyone watching, don't forget you can follow Sophie on Twitter and social media as well. The link will be on the bottom of the video here on YouTube, and I'll catch you next Friday here on Rich Politics. Bye for now.